All right, let's just jump right in. Deep inside the Penn Museum, there's this little clay tablet. It's over 4,000 years old. Now, on the surface, it looks like just another boring administrative record. But it's not. It's documenting a very unusual, very hurried transfer of secret objects, all sealed up and ready for departure. This wasn't a sale. It was an evacuation. And this is where it gets really interesting. It's the specific language on that tablet, CBS 10673. The word they use is key, which in their bureaucratic lingo means to depart. But here's the twist. It's used with a special marker, one that's only ever used for divine beings. The implication is, well, it's just stunning. The gods were leaving, and they were packing up very specific knowledge to take with them. Which, of course, brings us to the central question of this whole explainer. What could possibly be so big, so out of control, that these incredibly powerful beings would choose to strategically retreat instead of just, fighting it? Let's follow the breadcrumbs. To even begin to answer that, we have to completely reframe how we think about the Anunnaki. See, the texts don't really describe them as whimsical, emotional gods. They describe something that sounds a lot more like a structured and maybe even a bit of a boring bureaucracy. I mean, their very name tells you a big part of the story. Anunnaki literally means those of heavenly descent who are on Earth, and their job description, to decree fates. Now, this wasn't some poetic metaphor. They were seen as the actual managers who shaped and assigned reality for everyone and everything down here on Earth. So, and this is the crucial part, look at their structure. You've got Anu at the top, the CEO, basically. Below him is an executive council of 7 senior gods making all the big policy decisions. Then you have a larger assembly, a body of 50 Anunnaki, each one a department head for something like agriculture or astronomy. And they ran their operations out of the city temples, which were basically their regional headquarters. This wasn't a pantheon, it was a cosmic corporation. Okay, so we have the Anunnaki as this big cosmic organization. Now let's look at another piece of evidence that points to a really long-term crisis. I'm talking about the Sumerian King List. And right away, you see a problem. The timeline, well, it seems impossible. It lists kings reigning for tens of thousands of years. Get this, before the Great Flood, the first 8 kings are said to have ruled for a combined total of 241,200 years. Now, of course, mainstream scholarship usually writes this off as myth, or maybe a scribe just made a huge typo. But what if they didn't? What if we're just reading the clock wrong? See, these numbers aren't random. They're all multiples of 3,600, a unit the Sumerians called a shar. So what if these aren't years like we think of them? What if there's something like crisis cycles, a way of logging a painfully long managed decline, an emergency that stretched on for millennia? I mean, look at these reigns, 28,000 years, 36,000 years. This wasn't a sudden disaster. It was a slow-motion collapse. And all of this brings us straight to the Atrahasis Epic. We should stop reading this as just another myth. It feels a lot more like leaked meeting minutes from that divine assembly, a record of a really heated debate about what to do about a final, drastic solution to this ongoing crisis. So Enlil, the head of that executive council, he makes this complaint. But the text suggests this isn't just about noise. It says the land itself bellowed like a bull. This is about systemic strain, population pressure, environmental breakdown. The whole system was becoming so unstable that normal operations, decreeing fates, were becoming impossible. And this slide really lays out the two sides of that debate perfectly. Enlil's faction, they were arguing for a full withdrawal. From a cold, pragmatic point of view, humans had become a resource drain. The logical move? Cut their losses and let the impending flood reset the entire system. But Enki's faction fought back. They argued they needed to preserve human knowledge and labor for any kind of post-crisis recovery. This wasn't a debate about good versus evil. It was an administrative debate about disaster management. In the end, the assembly sided with Enlil, and Enki was bound by an oath of silence. So what does he do? He finds this absolutely brilliant loophole. He doesn't speak to the human, Atrahasis. No, he speaks at the reed wall of the man's house, knowing perfectly well that he'd be overheard. So he technically honors his oath, while committing what amounts to bureaucratic sabotage to save his pet project, us. Enki's clever little warning is a massive clue, But believe it or not, there's even more evidence that points to a calculated, long-term withdrawal, not some panicked last-minute escape. And for that, we can look at the archaeological record. This is just fascinating. In Eridu, the very first city, we can literally see the story in the temple's foundations. The earliest temples have living quarters. The god, or at least their representatives, lived on site. But then, around 4200 BCE, which happens to line up with evidence of rising groundwater, the construction gets weird and the living quarters just vanish. By 3000 BCE, the temple is just a massive ritual theater. The god has stopped living there. It's a gradual planned move from a residence to just a monument. We also have this whole category of texts called the city laments. And these aren't just sad poems about destruction. They're almost procedural. They describe the city's patron deity begging the divine assembly for help, being denied, and then performing a formal departure ceremony before the city is actually destroyed. These read like eyewitness accounts of the fallout from a planned evacuation. And then there's this thing, the Instructions of Shuruppak. It's usually looked at as just, simple wisdom literature. But if you read it in the context of an approaching collapse, it completely transforms. It becomes a disaster recovery manual. It's full of practical advice for a world without divine managers. Don't vouch for someone, don't locate a field on a road. It's basically operational security for rebuilding civilization from the ground up. Okay, so let's put it all on the table. We have a documented departure, a crisis timeline stretching for millennia, a debate over a strategic withdrawal, and archaeological evidence of a planned retreat. So what were the Anunnaki really running from? The threat wasn't an enemy. It wasn't some cosmic monster. It was a complete and total systemic failure. They were facing the collapse of the cosmic and environmental infrastructure that they had built, the very system they were supposed to maintain. And it was just spinning out of their control. The texts are actually very clear about the symptoms. You've got rising water tables at Eridu, Enki's own headquarters. You've got unmanageable population growth. The land itself is groaning under the strain. And this is the most critical part. The very boundaries between the different cosmic realms were becoming unstable. The Great Flood, it wasn't the cause of their departure. It was just the final catastrophic symptom of a system that had already failed. So in the end, the Anunnaki weren't fleeing a monster. They were administrators, executing a planned withdrawal from a project that had grown way beyond their control. And that leaves us with a really provocative thought. If these grand epic myths are actually the administrative records of a cosmic bureaucracy, what other incredible histories are hiding right there in front of us, just waiting to be decoded?